And we are back. Welcome to Sip and Talk. I am so thrilled to be here as we get ready to close out 2025.
Merry Christmas. And to all you Sip and Talkers out there, good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are. We're definitely ending the year on a topic that is, let's say, both festive and geopolitically explosive.
Just how we like it.
Exactly.
The holiday spirit is high, but my curiosity about how the world is really splitting apart is even higher. And you had this observation the other day that I think just perfectly set the stage for what we're talking about today.
I did, yeah. I was just, scrolling through two completely different news feeds, both focused on young people who, for all intents and purposes, speak the same language.
Okay.
On one hand, I'm reading about students at Taipei University, and they are just full of energy, debating, should I go to the US for my master's or Europe, or should I just stay here and jump into an AI startup? They're all about how to get into the global economy.
Right. Maximizing their participation, high-octane integration.
Totally. But then I switch over to my feeds from the mainland, and I'm seeing something else entirely. It's the rise of the rot economy.
The rot economy. What is that?
They call them Lao Shu Ren, which literally translates to mouse people.
Wow.
And it's this kind of quiet revolt. Young people are literally rejecting sunlight. They're rejecting, excessive socializing. They'd rather just stay in their bedrooms. It's this passive, almost invisible resistance.
And it's actually having an economic impact.
Oh, a huge one. It's seriously hitting retail consumption. They are just fully embracing tang ping or lying flat.
And that right there is the core puzzle we are here to unpack today. They share so much cultural history, they share a language, but their fundamental life goals are just fracturing completely.
Yeah.
This fracturing of the underlying logic of young people across the Taiwan Strait. I mean, despite decades of globalization and all this economic interaction, it might just be the most fascinating phenomenon of late 2025.
You can just see it in their whole posture. One group is actively practicing how to participate in the world, how to integrate themselves.
And the
other group, with the rot economy, they're practicing how to resist the system, how to make themselves invisible to all these pressures they feel they just can't change.
So our mission for this show is to really dig into that divergence. This isn't just about, GDP figures or some temporary market trend. This feels structural, it's historical, and it's deeply psychological.
It is. And we've kind of distilled this whole chasm into three main pillars that I think really explain why these two worlds are heading in such different directions. First, we have to tackle the historical and psychological fault lines.
Right, like why one side feels this burden of a century of humiliation and the other just doesn't.
Exactly. Then second, we'll get into the institutional codes, the fundamental operating systems of their daily lives, the big institutional showdown.
And finally,
we'll break down the identity dividend. It's this idea of a global strategic premium that's, it's granted to one side but not the other, and that leads to this huge suffering displacement.
All right, let's get into it, and let's start with that deep history.
We have to start there because the narrative is, it's everything. I mean, Beijing's core political justification today is all about great unification and national rejuvenation.
Okay.
And to get the population on board with that, you need a historical grievance. You need the Century of Humiliation.
That's the anchor, right? That narrative of past suffering at the hands of foreigners, which leads directly to the need for a strong, unified state today.
But Taiwan's story is just fundamentally different. It's built around democratic survival and sovereign fact. For a young person in Taipei, the main goal isn't fixing the past, it's about securing their future.
So let's trace that back. Where did these paths really split? For the mainland, that humiliation story is crystal clear. Starts with the Opium War in 1840, runs through the warlord period, foreign concessions, civil war, all the way up to 1949.
Right. It's over 100 years of nonstop conflict, both internal and external. But Taiwan's path gets totally decoupled from that after 1895.
The Treaty of Shimonoseki.
That's the one. It was ceded to Japan, and so Taiwan spent the next 50 years under Japanese colonial rule.
And this is where it gets interesting, because paradoxically, that's where a kind of structural protection began. Now, nobody is trying to sugarcoat colonialism. It involved oppression, cultural assimilation.
Of course, though.
But it also meant this rapid top-down modernization of basic infrastructure.
Precisely. We're talking about huge investments in things like sanitation, which, massively improved public health. They built a whole railway network, a reliable electricity grid, modern administrative systems.
That is such a critical distinction because in this strange, twisted way, Taiwan's modernization experience, even though it was imposed, it shielded them from what was happening on the mainland at the same time.
They weren't dealing with the Boxer Rebellion.
No. Or the warlord period, or the civil wars, or the worst of the famines. Their experience was just separate.
And that structural separation completely changed the island's collective memory. For a lot of Taiwanese people, the main historical trauma wasn't some deep-seated hatred for Western imperialism.
It became internal.
It shifted entirely to internal trauma, specifically what happened after the war in 1945. You have the 228 incident, this anti-government uprising that was just brutally suppressed by the KMT.
And then decades of the White Terror, the martial law regime.
Yeah. So the defining harm they felt came from the government they saw as their own, not from these distant Western powers. And when your main trauma is internal, it just fundamentally changes your relationship with the outside world.
A world which, ironically, later became a source of defense for them.
Exactly.
So let's follow that thread into the Cold War. If you've been conditioned to see the biggest threat as internal, how do you then see the external powers who are, well, actively propping up that internal government?
Well, I use this analogy a lot. If someone is actively sending you aid, and we have the data, it was like $1.5 billion in U.S. aid between 1951 and 1965.
A huge amount of money back then.
A transformative amount. So if they're sending you that, and they're defending your home from an aggressive neighbor, you can't psychologically sustain a story that they're suppressing you.
They're your sponsor. They're your protector, not your colonizer. That money was basically the foundation for Taiwan's economic miracle later on.
Right. Taiwan wasn't seen as a victim in the Cold War. It was the crucial, unsinkable aircraft carrier. It was the key anti-communist symbol in Asia.
And they held the China seat in the UN until 1971.
Think about that. You don't feel oppressed when you're technically representing one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, even if that representation is, contested.
And that strategic value has only gotten more intense over time. Today, it's morphed into the Silicon Shield.
That term is indispensable now. I mean, TSMC produces over 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors.
The really high-end stuff.
The stuff that powers everything. And this deep economic integration, it creates a massive community of interest with the West. Taiwan isn't some colonial subject to be exploited. It's a critical partner whose collapse would probably trigger a global economic depression.
Okay, let me push back on that a little bit, because when you say community of interest, that sounds really nice and benevolent. But isn't that same dependence also a form of control?
How so?
Well, the West needs those chips, so they defend Taiwan, but they also, they limit Taiwan's diplomatic space. Doesn't that strategic requirement put Taiwan on a very short leash?
That's a fair point, but I think the difference is in the nature of the constraint. I mean, look, if you're breathing the opponent's oxygen, which is Western market economics, democracy, security guarantees, you don't feel like they're choking you.
Feel supported.
Right. The constraints Taiwan faces, like, say, limitations on developing long-range missiles, they're understood as sort of a necessary evil to keep the strategic status quo. It's not seen as an attempt to subjugate or humiliate them.
And you do have to acknowledge the diplomatic frustration. I mean, the West, even while being supportive, still mostly skits to the one China policy and denies Taiwan full sovereign recognition.
Oh, for sure. And Taiwan gets shut out of major global bodies all the time, like the WHO and ICAO.
Which has to feel like international suppression. I mean, that's a form of humiliation on the world stage.
It does, but here's the critical psychological move that happens inside Taiwanese society. They overwhelmingly blame that exclusion, that suppression, on Beijing's obstruction.
Not on Western malice.
Right. The blame is on Beijing's relentless diplomatic pressure. The narrative is basically, the West wants to help us and integrate us, but China is using its muscle to stop it.
So the blame gets cleanly shifted to the one and only party that's applying all this systematic diplomatic and military pressure. That separation is everything.
And recent policy actions only reinforce that view. Like when the Dutch and Australian parliaments passed those resolutions in 2024 and 2025 saying that UN Resolution 2758 does not settle Taiwan's status.
That's seen as the West actively pushing back against Beijing's interpretation.
It's seen as protection, not oppression.
Mm-hmm.
And the economic numbers back this all up. If you look at the 2025 data, Taiwan's exports to mainland China and Hong Kong have hit a 20-year low. It's below 30%.
And at the same time,
Exports to the U.S. and Europe just keep climbing. So Taiwan is physically, economically, and psychologically moving out of the mainland's orbit and deeper into the Western trading system.
the historical fault line is just. It's complete. You have one side whose history is rooted in this narrative of victimhood and the need for centralized strength.
And the other side is rooted in internal trauma and externally sponsored survival, which leads to this deep psychological embrace of a Western strategic partnership. This whole thing just sets the stage for wildly different ways of living.
Right. If history laid the foundation for the divergent psychology, then the institutional code is the script they live by every single day. So let's move from the abstract past to the concrete present.
Yeah.
Where does the pressure actually come from?
Well, the international observation on this is, it's totally unambiguous. When you look at all the global friction points, the systemic pressure that Taiwan feels comes almost exclusively from one source.
The People's Republic of China.
The PRC, period.
And we should detail the tactics, because they are just relentless.
They're pervasive and they're coordinated. Beijing is the only actor that is systematically demanding that global bodies, whether it's the World Health Organization, the International Civil Aviation Organization, even Interpol, exclude Taiwan.
They're the ones forcing airlines and hotel chains to change Taiwan's name to Taiwan, China.
It's diplomatic strangulation day in and day out. Now, contrast that with the Western role.
Which, as Americans, is what we're most interested in.
The Western nations, the US, the EU, Japan, they act as security and participation supporters for Taiwan. You see it in legislation, you see it in arms sales under the Taiwan Relations Act, you see it in strategic alliances that treat Taiwan as a vital, if complicated, democratic partner.
So no Western nation is systematically trying to erase Taiwan's identity. They're just maneuvering around Beijing's pressure to maintain some kind of stability.
Exactly. The distinction is absolutely vital. One entity is actively trying to suppress you and demanding your erasure, while the others are strategically constraining themselves because of what that first entity demands.
It's all about perception. When the U.S. sends a congressional delegation, it's seen as a signal of support, not a colonial visit.
That's right. And that perception, which is based on the actual behavior of the two systems, it just informs everything else.
Okay, let's get down to brass tacks here. The actual political systems. The difference in these two societies really comes down to the core structure, the eye-test comparison of freedom and governance.
Let's start with the most fundamental question. Who holds the power?
In Taiwan, it's a vibrant, sometimes messy, multi-party democracy. They've had 4 peaceful transfers of power since the year 2000. Power comes from ballots, and the presidential term limits are strictly enforced.
The system guarantees rotation, which means it guarantees accountability.
And in mainland China.
It's one-party leadership, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. Power is determined by these internal party mechanisms. And most importantly, the 2018 constitutional amendment got rid of presidential term limits.
Right.
Which solidified this idea of permanence for the current leadership. It reinforces the idea that the ruler isn't chosen, but is inherited or maintained indefinitely.
And that single change has this massive psychological implication for mainland Gen Z. If the leader is permanent, you can't hope to vote him out, which just reinforces the resignation we talked about earlier.
Then look at freedom of speech. Reporters Sans Frontières, their index ranks Taiwan extremely high, usually in the top 25, number 24, I think.
And public criticism of the president is like a national pastime.
It's considered part of their democratic defense capability. But on the mainland, the environment is the complete inverse. I think they're ranked 178. The Great Firewall is a political moat. Keyword censorship is instantaneous.
A critical post can get your account deleted or worse.
The unspoken rule is, in Taiwan, the government serves the people. On the mainland, speech must serve the stability of the party.
And finally, what about civic society and the rule of law?
Well, Taiwan has a super active civic society. NGOs, massive street protests like the Bluebird Action recently, where tens of thousands of people flooded the streets to protest legislative changes.
It's a social correction mechanism.
A vital one. And the judiciary is independent. They frequently rule that government actions are unconstitutional. But in the PRC, civil society is tightly controlled, assembly is severely restricted.
And the judicial system is explicitly a tool of the regime.
Exactly. You can't sue the Chinese state for political reasons and expect to win. In Taiwan, citizens successfully challenge the state all the time.
So these facts, they just define two completely separate realities. Let's go back to your restaurant analogy, because I think it makes this whole idea of participation versus resignation so clear.
Okay, so think about the mindset of a consumer. Taiwan's Gen Z, they're the consumer who finds a restaurant is bad. And what do? They post a negative Google review. They call out the owner on threads, or tsui, as they call it.
And they choose a different restaurant next time.
Right. Their action assumes they have the right to choose and the right to accountability. It's textbook political participation. They believe they have the power to change the menu, or at the very least, fire the chef.
Okay, so what's the mainland Gen Z version?
Mainland Gen Z finds a restaurant is bad, and their response is totally internalized. It's, I just won't eat out anymore. I'll go home and drink water.
Wow.
They withdraw, they retreat. They don't complain publicly because they know that direct complaint or, trying to find a replacement restaurant is either impossible or just way too risky.
It's political avoidance, resignation. And that withdrawal is a direct reflection of the power structure. In Taiwan, you're choosing the restaurant owner every 4 years. There's a mechanism for change.
But on the mainland, the restaurant is a hereditary establishment. The owner is permanent. All you can do is pray for a benevolent owner who runs a good shop forever.
Oh, okay, let me challenge that a little. Because the CCP system, it guarantees high efficiency, right? I mean, they can build massive infrastructure projects, lift millions of people out of poverty super quickly, and demonstrate this incredible collective strength.
That's true.
So isn't that efficiency, that sense of national rejuvenation, isn't that a valid trade-off for sacrificing some individual choice? For a lot of young people, I could see how high efficiency that delivers a job and national pride might outweigh the chaos of constant democratic rotation.
And that is the core philosophical choice, isn't it? The high efficiency is undeniable, but it comes at the cost of accountability. The underlying logic in Taiwan is that sovereignty rests with the people. That's what justifies their whole system and their integration with the West.
While the mainland operates on great unity and stability.
Exactly. And Taiwanese people just refuse to give up their right to speak and choose their leaders, even if it means a slower, sometimes messier process. One system is built to serve the individual. The other demands the individual serve the stability of the system.
And that structural difference is why the youth trends on both sides look like they come from different planets.
Yeah.
Let's look at the daily life effects of these different codes.
Okay, so on the mainland, the pressure to conform and succeed is just overwhelming. It's a phenomenon they call nuwan, or internal involution.
Right.
And with youth unemployment data still being, a very sensitive topic in 2025, and this widespread academic deflation, where a degree is worth less than it used to be, the goalposts have totally shifted.
It's not that ambitious global goal of getting rich anymore.
Not at all. The goal has shifted from getting rich to getting ashore. That's shang'an, which means landing a stable civil service job. Or the other goal is run, which is code for emigration.
Stability or escape, those are the options.
Those are the options. And when you're stuck in that kind of high-pressure system, you need coping mechanisms. So we're seeing young people develop spiritual resignation.
Which is what, exactly?
It's where you mentally quit your job while you're still physically showing up. And exquisite selfishness, which is this necessary tactic of just hyper-focusing on your own survival to climb that hyper-competitive ladder.
And this leads to those unique, often dark-humored forms of escapism you mentioned.
It does. The rot economy is the quiet protest of just avoiding sunlight and cutting consumption. It's about making yourself small to avoid the crushing pressure to succeed in the traditional sense.
And their travel habits reflect this too. This special forces tourism thing is huge.
Oh, it's wild. It's extreme, short burst, heavy experience, light material travel. Like, think about catching an overnight train, hitting 3 major tourist sites in 8 hours, and then immediately heading back to the office.
It's hyper-efficient, highly regimented travel.
And the irony is that intense regimentation, that focus on efficiency in their free time, is actually a psychological relief from the societal pressure cooker. It's about having control in a world where they feel they have none.
And socially, the pressure has led to this profound isolation.
It really has. The rise of soft-boiled egg socializing is fascinating. It's these fixed, deep conversations with a very small, trusted circle, a comfortable middle ground between, like, surface-level buddies and the all-consuming demands of family.
But get this, the most striking data point to me is that 13.5% of mainland young people are confiding in AI virtual people.
Yeah. Why? Because these virtual companions provide more stable, non-judgmental emotional value than their parents or their stressed-out friends. It's a systemic solution to social isolation caused by system pressure.
And politically, their passion gets funneled into these safe harbors. Two-dimensional culture, the Guoxiao or national trend movement, patriotic video games like Black Myth, Wukong.
It's a safe way to express national pride and collective identity without touching any sensitive systemic debates.
Okay, so now let's cross the strait to Taiwan's Gen Z. Their priorities, according to the 2025 Ipsos report, are totally different.
Completely. They're focused on quality of life, gender equality, and environmental sustainability. They aren't trying to escape the system, they're trying to refine it and expand its definition of fairness. They will fiercely defend their right to choose.
They're the ultimate digital natives, and they use that space for active political participation. I mean, they are global leaders in traffic to Threads or Sui. They're constantly questioning policy on Dcard. These platforms are like a real-time democratic defense capability.
They don't withdraw, they dive in. And their lifestyle reflects that focus on self-definition. They're into hybrid fitness like HYRX, combining strength and endurance. They're big on retro travel, with over half of them buying vintage items as souvenirs.
It reflects a desire to connect with and define their own history.
Yeah, and they prioritize authentic sharing. They trust direct reviews from frontline staff or real customers way more than polished advertising. They demand genuine connection and transparency.
So you end up with two totally different kinds of anxiety emerging from these systems.
Right. Taiwan's anxiety is environmental. It's about high housing prices, low salaries, and the constant existential threat of war. It's an anxiety about the world they live in.
Whereas China's anxiety is existential. It's about high work hours, high unemployment, low salary, and this crippling fear of being discarded by the system.
It's an anxiety about themselves and their inherent value. One group is worried about the structure of their home. The other is worried they're going to be evicted entirely.
Which brings us to our third and, I think, most critical pillar here. If these young people are culturally and racially so similar, why do their futures look so different? This is the fatal question, isn't it? If Taiwan is truly part of China, why don't Taiwanese people share the structural suffering and global stigma that mainland Chinese citizens currently experience?
This is the identity dividend in action, and it's the global reality that just completely shatters the political rhetoric.
You have to start with the most objective piece of data we have, the passport. It's the international security apparatus's verdict on who the world trusts.
Right. Look at the 2025 Henley Passport Index. The ROC Taiwan passport gets you into over 140 countries visa-free. We're talking the entire EU, the US, Japan.
And the PRC passport.
It's only around 80. And that difference isn't just a number, it represents a massive reduction in friction. Taiwanese travelers are greeted with convenience and welcome. They don't have to face these lengthy visa applications or secondary security screening just to attend a conference.
So any feeling of being bullied by foreign powers is basically nullified the second they land in a Western country.
Because they're integrated into the global travel system. And here's the crucial security element. RRC Taiwan passport holders are not automatically included in the CCP risk profile. They aren't the primary target of U.S. sanctions or academic scrutiny or surveillance lists designed to mitigate Beijing's foreign influence.
Think about students trying to get research visas in the U.S. A student from the mainland, especially in a STEM field, might face secondary FBI screening or years of delay because of suspicion of state ties.
But a Taiwanese student with the exact same racial profile often moves through the process with comparative ease. They avoid the burden of political consequence just because of the color and the name on their travel document. They get the benefit of the doubt.
Which is a tangible identity premium.
It is. And it leads to this fascinating sociological question. Why do Chinese tourists or students abroad so frequently resort to shouting, "You are being racist," when they face criticism or scrutiny?
While Taiwanese people rarely, if ever, feel the need to use that defense.
It's because Taiwan has been granted this protection umbrella by its political status. It's seen as a democratic fellow traveler. The Economist Intelligence Unit's Democracy Index consistently ranks Taiwan in the global top 10, and that political identity grants them this fundamental political correctness protective umbrella in Western societies.
The world sees a political choice. When they see a Taiwanese citizen, any criticism is usually seen as individual critique. They're accountable as individuals in a free society.
But when they see a mainland citizen, the individual is often viewed through the lens of the regime they represent.
And the contrast effect just reinforces this. When Western society criticizes wolf warrior diplomacy, that aggressive foreign policy, Taiwan is often held up as the good contrast.
The question gets asked all the time. Why can Taiwanese Chinese be so democratic and civilized while the mainland is so rigid? And this shields them from the political discrimination, giving them a significant identity premium when they're abroad.
Okay, we need to break down the mainland's rhetorical strategy here because it's critical for our listeners to understand.
It is. When the mainland narrative faces international criticism, say, over Xinjiang or the South China Sea, they deliberately conflate three distinct layers to weaponize the idea of anti-racism.
They mix up race, which is Han or East Asian,
with nationality, which is a PRC citizen,
and with regime, which is the CCP system.
Right. So when the world applies precaution against the regime, like sanctioning a tech company or scrutinizing a diplomat, the narrative immediately twists it into, you are discriminating against the Chinese race.
The goal is to short-circuit legitimate political and institutional critique by activating the global anti-racism framework.
But because Taiwanese individuals are seen as representatives of a democratic system, not an authoritarian one, they aren't viewed as an extension of that regime. So their race is successfully separated from their political identity in the global eye. They're not burdened by this collective rhetorical debt.
So let's run the final test here. If Beijing's claim that Taiwan is part of China were institutionally true, the global system would treat Taiwanese citizens exactly like it treats mainland citizens.
Well, it doesn't.
If Taiwan were truly part of China, Taiwanese citizens would be automatically categorized as high risk, facing surveillance and travel restrictions.
Taiwanese academics would be universally viewed as potential CCP propaganda channels, facing the same scrutiny as mainland scholars.
And critically, Taiwanese companies like TSMC would be automatically included in China-related sanction lists by the US and EU, which would cripple the global supply chain.
And yet, none of that is true. TSMC is defended by the West. Taiwanese travelers are welcomed by the West. Taiwanese students are trusted by the West.
So the cold, hard reality that explains this whole divergence is this. Taiwan does not share the structural suffering because, at the institutional level, the international community does not treat Taiwan as part of China.
The world's practical behavior, from passport privileges to strategic alliances, it just operates under a completely different code than Beijing's rhetorical claim.
So what does this all mean for us, the Sip&Talkers, watching from the outside? We've seen two young generations who are, well, they're struggling and thriving under radically different systems. One system, on the mainland, is geared toward creating a sense of collective pride and national strength through this centralized efficiency.
And the other, in Taiwan, is geared toward cultivating individual dignity and freedom through political choice, social self-correction, and this intense global collaboration. Both sides have anxieties, but their anxieties are pointed at fundamentally different things.
Which leads us back to the definition of part of China. We've really identified three definitions that never truly seem to overlap.
First, there's Beijing's definition, which is rooted in historical narrative and the emotional need for national rejuvenation.
Then there's the international community's definition, which is based purely on risk management and strategic calculation. In that view, Taiwan is a strategic partner and the PRC is a strategic competitor.
And finally, there's Taiwan's own definition, which is the product of daily life, free democratic development, and the fierce defense of individual choice.
And these three definitions are just constantly pulling against each other, but they never align. And that friction defines the future.
So before we sign off for the holidays, we want to leave all of you with a question. You don't need to answer it publicly, but you should consider it privately. It's the real soul question to end our conversation today.
I want you to just close your eyes and think about the future you want for yourself and for your children. If you had to choose the ruling government for your future, and you only have these two options, would you choose the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, which promises high efficiency and national rejuvenation?
Or the Republic of China, the ROC, which provides greater choice and greater freedom?
You don't have to say it out loud. The answer lies in your own vision for the future and what you prioritize in the social operating code of your own life.
Thank you so much for joining us for this discussion on the two worlds of Gen Z. We always appreciate you, our dedicated Sip&Talkers.
And before we close out 2025, we have to send a special shout out and wish a very happy holiday to our old friend, Mickey.
Yes. We know he's been focusing on his recovery, so we're wishing him good health and a very speedy return.
Definitely. Keep sending him those good vibes. And you can check out Mickey's YouTube channel. It's called Mickey to Life. He's got some great memes, liquor reviews, travel vlogs. It's a lot of fun.
Be sure to subscribe to the Sip&Talk podcast. Until next time, stay curious.
See you next time.